You're listening to the Bear in Mind podcast, episode number 14.
A podcast about love, color, and identity, and where driving yourself crazy is totally sane and curable. Now your host, T. Vias.
Today I'm going to talk about hot and cold, and I'm not referring to the weather, I'm referring to intimacy, and it's when you're in a relationship and it feels like there's an intense amount of intimacy and then it goes cold. And I think the term sometimes they call it ghosting, where it just then goes cold. But also the hot and cold pattern that can be there, where there's an intense amount of intimacy and then there's nothing, and then again, a intense amount of intimacy and then also nothing after that. And so it kind of has this pattern to it. So I refer to this concept as running hot and cold, which I actually think Katy Perry is referring to this concept in her song Hot and Cold. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about this concept in detail because I'm currently kind of going through something with a new friend, and I'll call her Nina. And so the acquaintanceship, I've actually known her for quite some time as an acquaintance, and it now is slowly starting to develop maybe more into a friendship. And so our budding friendship is kind of going in this hot and cold direction, and it's kind of easier to look at a hot and cold behavior in somebody else than kind of see it happen with yourself, because I've had hot and cold behaviors before, and actually I noticed it was a pattern. I couldn't really see it very clearly, but I knew that I would sometimes share too much or be really reserved, and I would go back and forth between these extremes. And so when I kind of saw some of her behaviors resemble some of my past behaviors, I found it kind of fascinating to be on the other end of these extreme moments of sharing and vulnerability to then absolutely no kind of communication with her. And I've known her in terms of an acquaintance, so I'm going to kind of just go through some of the circumstances. I've known her through a social group of mine, and we've never really spoken. And when we have, I haven't, in the past, I didn't really kind of enjoy the conversation, mostly because of how I was viewing the conversation and nothing to do with her. And I would say that she's more of the talker, because in most group situations, I tend to listen more and other people tend to talk more. So I kind of find it hard sometimes to jump in conversations, especially in group situations. And so then we kind of started running into each other again, and then we started chatting about something, and we got on a topic that we're both very interested in, and we decided, okay, let's meet for a cup of coffee. And so we saw each other a couple of times face-to-face for discussions, and we were constantly kind of in contact with each other, either like through short discussions or texting or anything like that. So it was very kind of what I would call, at least my perception of it is, it's very hot. Like, you know, we're in contact a lot more than we ever had been at any point in knowing each other for a long time, or at least knowing of each other for a long time. And then after this frequent, intense contact with each other, it abruptly stopped for a while, I think about a month, and then it started up again as frequent and intense, and then it stopped. So there was this kind of hot, cold pattern happening. And I could really see myself in these behaviors. I know that I had these very similar behaviors with many of my acquaintances and friends. And there's something that I had put together and that I hadn't put together when I had first discovered that I was behaving like this, and I was trying to realize, okay, maybe I don't have a lot of intimacy in my life and I need to kind of work on it. And one of the things I realized is, although there's a huge amount of sharing of information when you're hot with somebody, to the point where you get sorry for the pun, but you get burnt. So meaning you get so much information that it's almost hard for the other person to take it in. And I realize sometimes when I'm sharing so much with somebody, you're putting them through a mental overload of just processing information and trying to understand. And nobody can really take it all in at once. And then when I step back and look at it, even though somebody is sharing a ton of information with you, it's almost like you still don't really know them. And I kind of realized that, I was like, okay, I've known her for a really long time as an acquaintance. And then we started to share our common interests and talk a lot more about it and share things about it. And I realized I really didn't know her. And that was kind of this moment where I thought, well, okay, even if you're hot and cold, or even if you're mostly hot, it almost can feel like intimacy. Like when you're sharing so much information with somebody, it feels like, wow, you're really connecting and you're being really vulnerable. And that's a courageous thing. And it feels kind of courageous in the moment, I think, because I remember when I was hot, it would feel like, wow, I'm really sharing it. But then at the same time, it's like, what are you really sharing? And are you actually then considering the other person in that conversation? Because, you can reveal yourself to people, and the person also has to kind of have room to reveal themselves to you, to kind of have intimacy between each other. But sometimes when we get caught up in revealing a lot of things about ourselves, we're often masking maybe some of the things inside of ourselves, our true self, I would say. And I had wondered if maybe that's what I was doing a lot of the time when I was hot. Now, I don't know if my friend is doing that, and she could have really great intimacy and has nothing at all to do with whether or not, I don't know if she has really good intimacy with herself. What I feel like is, even after having gone through this experience with her of hot and cold, that I actually felt that I didn't really know her. I knew a lot of things about her. I knew a lot of facts about her, and maybe some of the things in her day-to-day life. But at the same time, I really didn't feel like I could say, hey, my friend Nina, she's like this. And so the hotness kind of disguises itself a little bit as cold. And they're actually they're the same thing. The phrase, the double-sided coin or something like that, where even when you're being hot, it's almost like you're also being cold, where there's actually no sharing of that true self. So then you end up kind of in the same place, no matter which direction you're coming at, whether you're not sharing or you're oversharing. So either way, you end up with frostbite or getting burnt, and none of those two things are very pleasing. And so I'm actually looking forward to getting to know her a lot more, and I am learning a lot from my interactions with her about myself, actually. And I hope in the future that I do get to know her, even through weaving throughout maybe the hot and cold ways in which we communicate with each other, that I've also learned maybe how to be a better friend to somebody who is navigating from the aspect of hot and cold for whatever reason, is that maybe I just come at more of an even pace into the friendship. And so I'm really looking forward to that. And I think I'll be coming back to this concept of hot and cold and intimacy in the future. So I'm going to say goodbye here, and I'll check back with you next week.
Thanks for listening. Listen for a new episode next Tuesday by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Bye for now.